Tag. I'm Corey Latislaw, and today I'm going to talk to you about coaching, which you've probably heard about. It feels like it's all the rage these days. Everybody's talking about it as the business skill that you need, but are you any good at it? Am I any good at it? I used to think I was. But this year, I went on a executive coaching course, and I spent 6 months studying pure coaching and what that looks like. So I'm trying to take that blend of what does pure coaching look like and what might it look like inside your organizations, and what can you steal to be a better coach. It was a really humbling experience, but really valuable because it brought me back to that beginner's mind and thinking about what I can improve and what is most important for how I show up for the people I lead. So in that spirit of self-reflection, we're going to do just a small exercise here. Just think about how effective are you at using coaching in your day-to-day right now. Just rate yourselves in your head. Keep that number. We'll talk about it at the end. 1 is for you barely use coaching ever, and 10 is you use it all the time and you have really deep knowledge there. So I'll give you a second to just come up with that for yourself. But what's interesting is there's a huge perception gap of how good we think we are at coaching and how good we actually are. So this was a Harvard Business Review study of executives, and 24% of them rated themselves as really good at coaching. Turns out, though, they were rated at the bottom third by the people that were actually being coached by them or the people that were observing them. So there's that perception gap there, and you may be struggling with that, as maybe I am too. I feel like probably a little bit less now, but that's mostly because I've been forced to reckon with it all year. You're probably more than like a consultant than you are a coach when you're working with people, because often you're giving people answers or you're trying to convince them to your point of view. You've already made up your mind well before you got into that session with them. So how could you actually coach them? That might also take the form of asking closed questions, your advice in disguise. For example, have you tried insert my idea here? And I want you to keep this little lady in your head. This is the advice monster. Just imagine her on your shoulder. But basically, we all are very well-intentioned. We love helping people. We love building people up around us. We got a lot of knowledge and we want to share it. But that strength is also our weakness because we don't really hold that in and let people be themselves and grow as well. And I think you know this from your own lives as well, but advice isn't always helpful unless you asked for it. Unsolicited advice is rarely ever helpful, and it's rarely ever empowering, nor is it motivating, because if you come up with your own ideas, usually you're much more excited about actually doing them, but if somebody tells you what to do, it's 50-50 maybe. And the major thing we're talking about here is this mindset shift from being an advice giver to more of an answer enabler. Now, if you consider the old adage, give a person a fish, they'll eat for a day, or teach them how to fish, they'll eat for the rest of their lives, that's the sort of thing we're talking about here. So this is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. We've just started a little bit with mindset shift. There's more around that. We'll talk about building skills and using models, but developing your own style we're not going to touch on. That's an emergent thing that'll come after practice and you try out different tools and techniques. And I think one of the hardest things that you're going to face is getting really good, clear feedback on how well you're actually doing it. So for me, I had a cheat code where I had 6 months of introspection, not only on myself, but people observing me. Like at the end of the course, I had to do a 3,000-word essay. I had to create a model. I had to present it. I had to, coach in front of a panel of judges. So I was constantly bombarded with feedback. So I think unless there's a really strong feedback culture where you work or 360 surveys that you might be able to do, that's probably going to be your biggest struggle, especially if you're trying to teach yourself these skills. So if you can, highly recommend the class. Not here to sell it, though. So as leaders, we have 2 main goals. One is build people up, but the main one is deliver results. And we wear all of these hats and more. You might be a cheerleader, a sponsor, and the best managers and leaders use each of these in the right situations. For example, mentorship is really good earlier on in someone's career because those skills are much easier to teach. But once you start going up the leadership ranks, as you all know, it's very difficult to give cookie cutter answers. And something that works at one place might not necessarily work somewhere else as well. The idea is you want to understand your default mode, where you kind of tend to go to. For me, that's manager, mentor. And so that you know what those tells are when you start hearing the little advice monster on your shoulder being, ooh, ooh, tell them this thing, tell them this thing. So what is coaching? Well, imagine you're exploring a cave. Well, actually, you're the torch and the other person's exploring the cave. You're just shining some light in some areas, so they're moving it around. And you might be, oh, what's that over there? And they might go look at that for a little bit. But the idea is they're still looking for the treasure. It's not you. You're just there for the journey and helping guide them a bit. You're giving them space to find their own answers for themselves. Now, when might you want to try and use coaching? I like to use it when I think somebody's capable of doing the thing that they're bringing to me, and often they are because we hire smart people and we want them to succeed. But you need to be really careful that you're being very clear with them that you think that they can rise to the challenge. You're planning on coaching them. Because I've done a little bit of stealth coaching in the past and it didn't work out as well. I was like, oh, I'll just bring some coaching questions to it. But then they walked away thinking I didn't know what I was talking about because I asked them questions instead of answering their questions. So just a word of caution there. And ask yourself, are the people that you are leading continuing to come back with the same problems, with the same excuses, and haven't advanced anything? Are they trying to escalate the problems up to you? I found this a fair amount in my management. Ask yourself, is it maybe me first? So start with, am I mentoring them too much? Am I just telling them what to do instead of trying to coach to build that capacity? So if you start shifting towards the default coaching mindset instead, and you still see that there's a large gap, well, maybe it's time for you to start looking at either training or mentoring them because there is an actual gap there that you're not going to be able to coach them through. So in summary for this section, make sure that you stop defaulting to giving advice, solving people's problems, and just mentoring. What you need to do instead is think about coaching as your first port of call. And I know I can hear you from here. I'm too busy. They want answers from me. Yeah, I get it. I really do understand. But coaching is slower, but it's worth that investment when you take the time to help build up that leader. All right, now we're going to step up another step here and talk about some of the skills that can underlie the coaching. And then later I'll talk you through some models. But the zoom out on those skills are you need to let go of control and let them lead the agenda. It's the technical term in my coaching course, the agenda. You help them evoke awareness and understand where they are and where they want to be. And you do that by being a mirror to help them find insights. And you do that by listening better, so you can ask better questions. And then ultimately, you need to make sure that you're keeping accountability as well in there. Sounds easy in practice, but I think you'll find, and you probably have found, that it's pretty difficult in practice. So it sounds easy in theory, hard in practice. So the first skill here is letting go of your own agenda, the control you have on the situation. Think about how much space you can give them to explore and maybe even fail. Is there guardrails that you can put around it? Is it a mission critical thing? Is it something that you could let them kind of try and fail for a little bit before they grow? If not, that's fine, but where possible, can you put in some thresholds, like either monitor something on a dashboard, for example, or just monitor the situation yourself, have certain checkpoints that you're going to talk to them about it. But ultimately, they're going to own their own outcomes and the things that they focus on building those goals out in, and you're going to own more of the coaching process. So you will own the structure. I'll talk about a model later that you can use to direct the conversation to get them to outcomes and stuff. So I think all of us, especially if we're more of a helper at heart, like to try and help as much as we can. And that takes the form of advice, but also we're always trying to have that perfect question to make sure that we can help evoke awareness for them. But really the work of coaching is to be fully in the present in the moment, or as my coaching course called it, dancing in the moment, which is poetic, I like it. But so be there in the moment, give that gift of full presence, and then listen, and we'll talk about mirroring in a moment. But if you think about when you were programming back in the day, if you talk to a rubber duck, or these days ChatGPT, if you're trying to work through a programming problem, you might be just like talking through your process. Just doing that really helps you get much more clarity. But the benefit that a coach gives you is they can listen, they can ask questions, they can push you in different directions as well. So even if you were just sitting there listening to them the whole time, they would still find value of it. So you don't have to do work, you just need to be there and be there for them. So one of the things that I really took away from my class was about creating that amount of silence so that you can have people fill it. So it can be a quite useful tension that you create so that people can kind of go deeper into their thoughts. I find it awkward often, silence. I'm usually a bit of a silence filler. So this is where I struggled a little bit, had to sit on my hands to kind of hold myself back. But one of the pieces of advice from the class was to give it 3 beats. So like, wait, 1 Mississippi. Do you do that here? I'm not sure. 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, so that you have an amount of time to just let them see if anything else pops into the space that you've left. And if you think about listening, often I don't know how many of you have reflected on how well of a listener you are or what listening levels looks like, but we tend to be at this top of the iceberg where we're just hearing the day-to-day stuff, the conversation, listening to respond. And that's really just the surface level stuff. There's so much more going on underneath that, okay, so for example, if somebody is talking about 2 different career options that they could do. One of them are like, oh, I could stay at my current job and yeah, I could get a bigger role or whatever. Or I could take this other job over here. It's like, you see a little bit of a shift between those 2. So we'll talk about it in the mirroring slide in a moment, but the idea is you talk about, okay, well, I have noticed that when you were talking about this one, you're a bit more animated. When you're talking about this one, the energy dropped. Can you tell me more about that? So you are listening so that you can ask deeper questions around that. And it can be really tiring to listen at this level. I don't know how much of you have practiced focused listening exercises, but if you do it for half an hour or an hour, it's really tiring. And if you ever listened to your mind before through meditation or something, it's really loud, or at least mine is really loud. So talking about the mirror idea here, so you're just reflecting what you're seeing. More things that you could talk about in a court of law, not adding your own judgment, not adding your own interpretations on top. So you wouldn't say, I saw you were really excited about that, so obviously that's the thing you should be doing. Why are we even talking about this other thing you're totally bored by? That is an interpretation. That's a little bit further than just being the mirror of what you're seeing. You also want to make sure that you are driving accountability for the people that you're managing over time. And I'll talk about the GROW model and where I saw some problems with this in the past. But what that looks like in a session itself, I start by asking them, what are you taking away from this session? What are you going to do differently? So then they've kind of like, now they're consolidating all the things they've talked through. They might have talked about 20 different things in totally different directions. But then they're coming to the summary of what happened. You're like, great, what are you going to do about it? When are you going to do it? How will we know that you've done it? How will you monitor it? So asking all those questions is really important to help them get to an actual actionable step, and then gives you the accountability check to follow up with them. And I would also recommend, if you're not already doing this, track things in, for me, I created it in Coda because I would like delegate things, and I had my own backlog of initiatives and stuff throughout the company and who was doing what, and I would check in with them. But you could do something like paper. That's also good too. But just keeping track of the types of things that people have promised to do to hold them accountable for it, especially if it's important to you. Those make it a little bit easier. But there are other ones that it might be important to them, but they might need someone to push and ask them about it. And if you're not seeing them follow through, definitely probe on that. Finally, while those are all actionable things you could do, they do take a lot of time to deepen those skills. This section, I think you could try and use these models next week or two if you wanted to try it, if you haven't done them already. And it can feel quite overwhelming to get started with coaching if you haven't done it before. But there's a lot of off-the-shelf models that already exist. So we'll talk about Grow and Oscar here today, but then there's Gestalt, there's Coactive, there's a bunch of other models out there. And if you wanted to chat after this talk, more than happy to share the different models and other things I learned from the course with you. And I'm aiming for awareness in this talk, not completeness, because there's no way I could teach you these models super deeply. But I just want you to roughly be aware of how they can be used, pique your interest perhaps, so you can start trying them. So I'm going to start with Grow. I've been using this one for about 6 years or so. Raise of hands, who's used Grow before? A decent amount, cool. So this one's really easy to get started with. So the way the structure works is first you try and pin down a goal. Now, you start with something like, oh, we've got about 30 minutes today. How would you like to use the time? What would you like to talk about? What would you like to explore? They might be a little bit fuzzy, wishy-washy. You might kind of go back between goal and reality for quite some time where you're trying to figure out, what are we actually trying to do here today? Ultimately, you're trying to get a goal because then you can get down to the options later. But yeah, you'll bump back and forth between the goal and the reality. Eventually, I start asking them, great, but what are we going to do about it? And they come up with some surface level ones at first, which is great, but I push them to about 20, and I make sure that they're being creative about the types of things that they're doing, not just like, well, I could send this email. Okay, great, but what else could you do? And then usually about the 15-minute mark, let's assume we're doing a 30-minute session. If we haven't gotten to the options yet, I might be like, great, sounds like we've got a really good idea of what's going on here, but how about we start talking about how we're going to move forward? And then you ask them to choose one of the things. You might cycle back through those a little bit, but at some point you're going to get to an action, and you're going to have them commit to when they're going to deliver it. And what you're seeing here is a Miro board I created during COVID, which in peer coaching, Grow is usually just a conversation. You're not writing it down, you're just talking, and then they go off and do something. You ask about that thing they said they'd do. But in this case, we did it as a workshop, so between two people, and then they would have all the stickies. I took notes in the goal and reality and options and stuff, and they could use it and have a little board off on the side to track the ones that they had started. They could use it again to come back to brainstorming. Because one of the things I found with Grow is it's great for dealing with smaller goals that slot into a 30 minutes or an hour-long session, but often the things that we're trying to tackle are much bigger than that. So I found that it wasn't good for huge topics, and I found that looking at the long arc of accountability was a little bit more difficult with it. But this was one way that it kind of changed that dynamic a bit because it had a record of it. And one of the examples that I used here was someone was trying to implement TDD in the team, for example, and there was resistance from the other engineers. So I worked with her to identify the key players and how that was playing out and who she needed to influence. Ultimately, she came up with a lot of different ways, and then she worked on it over a series of 2 months, and then ultimately was able to install it. But it's really helpful to help people kind of move in a direction that they're passionate about. Now we'll talk about Oscar, which is a bit more of an evolved, in my view, version of Grow. It's a little bit more solutions focused. So Grow is, to me, feels like we're only focusing on the problems and all the details of said problem. With the outcome, it might be something like, oh, well, I want to be better at, I want to be a more strategic leader. So that's a much bigger thing. Now, you might focus on one small thing and then do a Grow model for that one aspect of it if they have a document they're trying to prep or something like that. So that's what outcome looks like. What is the future state that you want, and what's it going to look like when you get there? With scaling, you ask them, okay, well, where are you now in that continuum? Often you have them create their own scales. So at the beginning of the talk, I had you do a 1 through 10. But if they're a little stuck, you can choose those numbers for them, but never choose the number for them. Never say, oh, is it a 2 or is it a 10? No, like, have them choose it. In the know-how section, you're going to be doing things like asking them, well, have you done something similar to this in the past? And what resources did you use then? How did you accomplish it? Or who's amazing at this in the organization right now? And what can you steal from them? And if you've seen them do good stuff in the past, or even in that conversation, you can affirm, oh, I really liked it when you did this thing, or I really noticed that in the past when you were leading this initiative, you were showing a little bit of a strategic mindset there. Maybe you could bring that in this as well. You're still getting to an action point as well, and then the R for review is we're going to look back at it very frequently. I find that it's really helpful for breaking zero-sum thinking and working with people with negative attitudes towards stuff and trying to get them to a much more positive space. People are a little bit hopeless and feeling stuck. You can kind of help get them unstuck. And ultimately, I see that it draws more of an ownership mentality. Cool, I hope you've been inspired by something you've heard here today. So we were only able to scratch the surface for sure. So please do come talk to me if you have any experience in coaching or something sparked something for you. And also I have both stickers and zines, so come get one of those. But the high-level takeaways I want you to have here is stop defaulting to advice and problem solving. Just think of the little advice monster on your shoulder. And that coaching is a really good way to build up accountability and ownership mentality, and just generally build up your leaders. Oh, and finally, we said that we were going to scale again at the end. So, has your view of your coaching shifted? And just take a moment to think about what has shifted for you. Maybe write it down on a piece of paper or on your phone, and what you might want to do going forward. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Corey. We've got a few questions up. The first one, what's the justification for team leads and managers when the teams just need a coach? Why not hire coaches instead of team leads?
Because I find businesses are cheap often. It would be ideal if they would get external coaches, 100% agree. And I think they would be better at it than us trying to sandwich it into our day among all the other roles we're trying to do. But practically speaking, because they probably won't get that support, it's probably good for you to try and build that skill up so you can help support them.
Thank you. Next one. According to you, I just assume it's you, what is the most important skills to engage to do coaching, and how do you develop or improve it?
I think they're all kind of important. Let me see. Probably shutting up and listening to people better. Like that's kind of the foundation to all of it. So you can hear oh, it's not showing it anymore. But yeah, that whole iceberg of listening and stuff really does unlock a lot of them. That and sitting on your hands and not giving advice.
And how long we got? We got a few minutes. So how to coach in technical decision making when it is my responsibility that those decisions are aligned across multiple teams?
Yeah. So it depends on what you're coaching for. Sometimes it might make sense to do more of a group coaching session. So for example, if you have leads across these different areas, think about how you might use your meetings that you already have set up with those team leads in a different way and kind of make that a little bit more coachy. But if you're talking about dealing with one leader and helping them be better, but making sure they're aligned, well, that's also a coachable topic there. Well, how do you keep aligned with all of those sort of things? And then I think it ultimately depends also on how mission critical it is that you must watch it versus giving them that space to experiment and see what they do with it.
Thank you. And just jumped ahead by Ted there. Any tips for working with devs or managers who resist coaching because they don't have faith in the coach?
Yeah, I find that techies are weird about coaching. So in my coaching course, they consistently told me to use the question, what's at the heart of this for you? I could not bring myself to ask that question. I really tried. Yeah. So I think grow is a really good way to do it, because you could be like, hey, I think you do this. I've found that telling them that they're going to be great and then doing something that's very structured that feels like programming anyway, like it feels a bit better to do the grow. Oscar, I think, could work too, but I haven't tried that in an organization yet, so I don't know how techies will respond to that. But they can get weird, definitely.
So, yeah, and then after this course, between 1 to 5, 1 being low, 2 top level, are the benefits using coaching in your daily life, and what are the benefits?
So in my daily life, I can tell you my husband doesn't like to be coached. He does like to be listened to better.
Dating a therapist.
Yeah. So I think it's a little tricky to use it in your day-to-day life as much, but it still can help with the better listening. And if somebody's getting a little stuck, you can ask some of those stealth coaching questions. Just don't do it a lot. And don't do it in a manipulative way, for sure.
And what's the main challenge in executive coaching?
Well, I'm 6 months into executive coaching, but my main challenge, I think, is still that don't give advice. But I'm still trying to learn these different models, and like I said, it was really rigorous course, and I now switched to Oscar as my default one. So for me, the learning edge right now is I want to focus on getting really good at Oscar.
And I think maybe the final one, great presentation. Would you recommend getting external coach or trying to be the coach's CTO or a mix of both?
Probably both. So I have a coach. I think it's really important. I don't know what I don't know, and they can push me in new directions and help me, figure out the things that are holding me back. So I think it's really helpful to have your own coach. I think if you can, bring in the coaching into your organizations as well. And if you can pay externals, please do bring them in as well.
Okay, thank you, Corey, for that one.
Thank you.